Now here in Washington, Delaware Senator Chris Coons, a top Democrat on the Foreign Relations Committee. And Senator, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Thanks, Chris. Great to be with you again.
Ever since President Trump took out General Soleimani about a week ago, Democrats have been calling it a major escalation and have been warning of dire consequences. But after a pretty ineffectual missile strike, Iran's foreign minister Javad Zarif said this: Iran took and concluded proportionate measures in self-defense. And here's what President Trump said.
Iran appears to be standing down, which is a good thing for all parties concerned and a very good thing for the world.
Senator, isn't it possible that President Trump's decision worked, that it took out one of our worst enemies in the Middle East and reestablished American deterrence?
Well, it certainly took out one of our worst enemies in the Middle East. Let's start there. None of us are going to mourn the passing of General Qasem Soleimani. The Quds Force, which he commanded, was responsible for the deaths of hundreds of Americans in Iraq and throughout the region, thousands of civilians. So nobody should be mourning his passing. But the larger question is, does it make us safer? Did it make our position in the region more stable? And is there a clear strategy for moving forward? President Trump ran in no small part on ending the forever wars in the Middle East, but we've got 15,000 more troops in the Middle East today, and the very real prospect, as you were just discussing with the National Security Advisor, of our being expelled from Iraq. Soleimani, that's been one of his core goals for 15 years. He may accomplish our expulsion from Iraq and the creation of a big vacuum there in his death in a way he couldn't in his life.
But wouldn't you at least concede that President Trump, and I know there was a lot of concern, oh my gosh, this is going to get us into a war, that so far the Iranians have, as the president said, stood down, said we don't want to escalate the situation, and maybe it made things better, not worse. Maybe.
This is an opening for the president and his whole team to show that there is a path towards negotiation and towards re-engagement with Iran about what a stronger, better, longer Iran nuclear deal might look like. And I hope they'll take it. My concern is that Iran has lots of ways that they can take action against us, both overt and covert, and I don't think they're done trying to seek revenge. The real question in front of us, I think, Chris, is whether or not President Trump and his senior administration officials believe that before taking actions that predictably over months, over a long period of time, could lead to war with Iran, they have to come to Congress to seek authorization.
All right, we're going to get to that in a moment. I want to talk about one of the other issues out there, the debate over how imminent the threat was that Soleimani represented and why they had to take him out. Here's what Secretary of State Pompeo said on Friday.
This was going to happen, and American lives were at risk, and we would have been culpably negligent. As the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said, we would have been culpably negligent had we not recommended to the president that he take this action in Qasem Soleimani. He made the right call, and America is safer as a result of that.
Is the Secretary of State lying?
Well, I won't say that. Frankly, in the classified briefing that lasted 75 minutes and had virtually the entire Senate there, we got less detailed information than President Trump shared with Laura Ingraham. So we were told repeatedly that there was reliable intelligence of an imminent threat. That's it. There was no more detail than that. There was no more specifics than what the president's been comfortable sharing on cable news. So the larger point about the consultation with Congress, working with Congress on a bipartisan basis to come up with a strategy that will work in the Middle East and that gives us some chance of deterring Iran, that's the big and the larger question. I'll remind you, President Trump has taken some very impulsive, even erratic moves in the Middle East recently. His decision to abandon our Kurdish allies in Syria led to hundreds of ISIS fighters being released, led to a number of our close European partners in the counter-ISIS campaign to be frustrated with us. So some skepticism on the part of Congress about whether or not there really is a thorough and a deliberate strategy here, I think, is justified by recent actions.
Let me pick up on that, because you heard me question Ambassador O'Brien, the National Security Advisor, about the larger strategy. There is no question imagine that as part of the Iran nuclear deal, the deal that John Kerry and Barack Obama negotiated, Iran got back billions of dollars in frozen assets, and that it used those assets to spread terror, give it to Hezbollah, Hamas, other bad actors around the Middle East? Would you be willing to concede that as part of the president's maximum pressure campaign, that at least they turned off the terror money spigot?
There's been a real impact on the Iranian economy and on the resources available to the terrible Iranian regime as a result of the maximum pressure campaign.
So that's a success.
That's a positive, but here's the negative that's happening at the same time. A real weakening of our alliances and our partnerships. What made the Iran deal possible was getting most of the world aligned with the United States in putting sanctions pressure on Iran. That's what got them to the table. Now we're in a place where, although President Trump, and I appreciate his saying this, is saying, here's a moment for diplomacy. We need NATO more engaged in the Middle East. We need our partners in Europe. Lots of other actions and steps he's taken in the last few years have weakened and strained those alliances and those partnerships. This recent incident of killing Qasem Soleimani has further strained some of our partnerships with Germany, with France, with the UK in the region, and we need them if we're going to build a stronger next Iran deal.
In this week's classified briefing, the 75 minutes we've been talking about, you confronted Secretary of State Pompeo at the end, I gather, 3 times. What happened?
Well, I was simply trying to get us to a point of what I thought would be common agreement, that if there's an instance of imminent threat, Article 2, Commander-in-Chief, the President has the power to act to protect our troops and our interests overseas. But if there's an instance, as we now seem to be embarking on, where the president's drawn a clear red line, no nuclear weapon for Iran, and there's the real risk of months and months of preparation for a military strike to prevent that, of course, in that fact pattern, you have to come seek authorization. There wasn't a clear commitment to doing that, and I think there has to be. A democracy, when we go to war, is stronger when the Constitution is followed and the people's representatives authorize that conflict. I think that strengthens our resolve as a nation, and I think that strengthens our hand in the world. To ignore Congress, to not even consult with us, let alone seek authorization, I think weakens us on the world stage.
Finally, Speaker Pelosi will finally send the articles of impeachment over to the Senate this week. The Senate's going to begin its trial. How confident are you, if not at the beginning, at some point, that you can get 4 Republicans to come over and agree with the Democrats to call key witnesses?
Well, that's what this is all going to come down to, is Majority Leader McConnell is going to give us as much of a fair trial as 4 Republican senators demand. There's a key difference between trials and cover-ups. Trials have witnesses, cover-ups don't. President Trump might have had his reasons for being skeptical of the House process. In a Republican-controlled Senate, I can't think of any reason he wouldn't want folks like Secretary of State Pompeo or National Security Advisor John Bolton, who were in the room, who were on the email chains, who know what happened, to come to the Senate, testify, and clear his name. If he is exonerated in the Senate by a purely partisan vote, I don't think he will have been exonerated at all. And this is only the 3rd time in our nation's history that we're going to have an impeachment trial.
Do you have any commitment from senators, Republican senators, that they will vote to call witnesses?
No. At this point, there's just conversations, trying to find some reasonable bipartisan path forward to insist on a fair trial. I respect that there are Republicans who deeply want President Trump to have a fair trial. I think that's what all of us should want. But to have a trial where the critical witnesses were blocked by the president from appearing in front of the House, to have a trial where there's no sworn testimony available, is unprecedented. President Clinton, even President Nixon, directed his closest advisors and cabinet officials to cooperate. And in the Clinton impeachment trial, there was sworn testimony that they were debating about how it would be presented.
I got about a minute left. Yeah. President Trump says if John Bolton is subpoenaed and if John Bolton agrees to testify, he won't allow him to discuss their conversations about Ukraine. Take a look.
I would love everybody to testify, but there are things that you can't do from the standpoint of executive privilege. You have to maintain that.
Would any president allow his national security advisor to discuss the conversations they had over national security in the Oval Office.
If that national security advisor could clear his name by doing so, I think most presidents would. The executive privilege doesn't exist to allow you to cover up a crime. That's what the president's being accused of here. I think he should want the former national security advisor to testify truthfully in front of the Senate.
And if he says, if Bolton, there are a lot of ifs here, if Bolton is allowed to testify and the president invokes executive privilege, your response would be what?
You can't invoke executive privilege to cover up a crime. Bolton should testify.
Senator Coons, thank you. Thanks for coming in. We'll be watching what happens this week, both on Iran and the impeachment trial. Up next, we'll bring in our